Top story right now is about democracy. And I like to clearly tell you what we're trying to do around here. So let me tell you up front right now, this is a little different than our typical start to this news program, The Beat. Right now, I'm going to try to walk through the broader path of how democracy is in danger, even beyond how that point itself has become a kind of rhetorical refrain in Washington, a refrain that is also true. So we're going to go through that right now, me and you together, and then turn to a special expert on this a little later. The midterm elections, they occur on one day in November. And we know that, of course, is Election Day. But these primaries for who can win on that day, who even will be in a position as a major party nominee to win, they keep playing out pretty randomly because every state just sets its own dates. And right now, some of the primaries may matter even more than Election Day because there are more people running to seize power to try to end democracy, to try to corrupt our system of government so your vote won't matter. More people running to do that than at any point in modern history. So these primaries are something of a checkpoint. But those figures keep winning Republican primaries with signs of an extreme post-insurrection slate of candidates that are even more militantly anti-democracy than some of the current Republican incumbents who've minimized the insurrection. And it's exactly some of those types of candidates who won again last night.
We've got a crazy fake president.
Donald Trump won this election in a landslide. Listen, I believe that Donald Trump won the 2020 election.
We have serious questions about the 2020 election.
The election was rigged.
I think Trump won in 2020. You've got to admit, this election was really messed up.
We need to stop election fraud.
Running for office on a brazen lie about the previous election is a type of confession. These are people who are openly defending an illegal attempt to overthrow the results of that election. And in turn, when they do this, well, it's reminiscent of in other countries sometimes where we've seen growing militant, sometimes violent force that believes the current government is literally illegitimate. I don't mean that as rhetoric like you really don't like those folks. I mean like the wrong people stole the election, like the coup is exactly backwards. These are people directly telling voters they favor overthrowing democracy, elections, and installing their side regardless. This is not a drill. So for congressional candidates, that kind of pledge is an implicit or explicit pact to go even farther to overthrow lawful votes if there's another January 6th and their side lost, according to the votes. That's one track. Then there's another track for candidates running to oversee elections. These are posts that were once considered pretty dry or boring. It's usually called the Secretary of State of a state, which is a little confusing because the federal position is about foreign policy. The state position is about running the elections. But now we're seeing a ton more interest, ominously so, for people running to exercise power in those positions to be in charge of future elections. Now that's the soft coup stuff. There are still some guardrails. An elections official who announced, and this is not news, this is a hypothetical. If an elections official announced, for example, they wouldn't count the votes of men or count the votes of members of the Green Party, well, that official would end up in court where we would expect independent judges to legally stop such a blatant effort at voter suppression or corruption. And the judges can mandate those votes still be counted regardless of what some nutcase decreed. Remember, Donald Trump never got close to filing any legitimate court case to reach the Supreme Court challenging his loss in 2020, but there is a precedent for contesting presidential elections. In 2000, there were plenty of public concerns at the time about partisanship by the Republican who was overseeing Florida's elections, Secretary of State Harris. But in the end, she didn't make those final calls. It went to the Florida courts and then to the Supreme Court. So that's one part of this. Then there's this very motivated, sophisticated effort to use what are essentially lawful means. That's different than a coup or submitting fraudulent materials like elector fraud that we've covered. That stuff can be illegal. There's a separate effort here to consolidate right-wing power against majority rule through lawful means. It's a simultaneous but legal push to distort your votes and hold on to power. Now, I could tell you about this in all sorts of ways. We're in the top of the news show. I said usually we don't always dive in all the way with you this early in the broadcast, but we're here the day after those primaries, and this matters. So let me pick one state. I'm thinking cheese. I'm thinking the Midwest. I'm thinking the great state of Wisconsin. Shout out to the cheeseheads. This is a great state with a lot of great people in it. But I'm here to tell you about the democracy problem they have, which illustrates something that's happening in many places. Take a look at a power grab there where Republicans have already coordinated back in 2011 using technological computer modeling and other political tricks to go from one map to the other. And the bottom line is, even if you feel like, okay, what am I looking at, is they used tricks to redraw the districts to skew the map on the right to look and be more red than the actual voting public. So I'll leave this up here. On the left, in 08, you have that roughly split state, blue and red. On the right, same state, similar voting, but the redrawing of districts and other shenanigans makes the state more red than the voters do. So that's Wisconsin. I'm not suggesting that the Republican votes don't matter there, and there are plenty of Republicans voting there. And I'm not suggesting this only happens on the right. There have been gerrymandering that has been deemed unfair by the courts and by nonpartisan experts committed by both parties at various times in American history. I'm reporting for you the news tonight, right now. This is happening much more aggressively in concert with a wider anti-democracy movement in the Republican Party. So let's stay in that great cheese state where you have Senator Ron Johnson, a MAGA Republican, pushing for Republicans there to take more direct control of the elections. He wants to scrap what is a system that provides some bipartisanship. They have a commission for that. And now, again, whether you feel like this is national news or not, if you look up in a future election and it's turning on Wisconsin and all these claims, you can think back to tonight when we went in this deep to tell you that they are on this because it's a Trump-backed candidate for governor who is pushing a very similar plot.
Was it rigged? Was it fixed?
Certainly, there was voter fraud.
I'm going to stop it. My number one priority is election integrity. I'm going to get rid of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. We should not even be having this conversation 21 months after the election. I'm going to stop the ballot harvesting.
Michaels is one of these candidates looking to take power in November and to work with some of those other means. And I just showed you a couple of them at the state level that could make Wisconsin sort of long-term, arguably permanently red, regardless of what voters do. This is a very dangerous moment. There are experts who look at this and warn that when you combine what I'm calling these lawful measures, no one's saying that those are crimes under current law, and you combine them with the illegal ones, the soft coup and voter suppression, you have the building towards a quasi-legal effort at a kind of anti-majority, anti-democracy, minority apartheid rule in America. I'm telling you about this tonight because it is, in some ways, the largest democracy story facing us, even if some of it is happening piecemeal in ways that don't always splash into the top of the newscast. So I said we're doing a little different. I wanted to give you that full briefing. We have our shortest break, 60 seconds, and then we return with Obamacare.
We just found out more fraud.
I got in this race always knowing I was going to challenge it, even if I did win the Republican primary, because we've got to get rid of the fraud.
If the people who did this and cheated are watching, I do not concede.
I'm not conceding because I'm a winner.
We're back with Obama campaign veteran Che Komanduri. Che, you know it's always the mark of a sane person to say they would definitely challenge their own victory on principle.
Right.
And yet, while some of it looks silly, some of it is deadly serious, as we just showed in our earlier report. Your view?
Yeah, I think what the GOP is really doing here is they are basically rendering the January 6th commission or trying to render it null and void. In the future, what they would like is not to have to send rioters into state capitals or the U.S. Capitol. What they would like is to have the rioters seated as elected officials in those capitals, ready to overturn elections, ready to rig the democracy and disenfranchise voters. And you see this in swing state after swing state. You know, you brought up Wisconsin, Georgia. We all remember Brian Kemp's infamous voter law that tried to disenfranchise people and wouldn't let you even give water to somebody who was standing in line. You see this in Florida, which I think is very instructive as well, where Ron DeSantis has created a sort of a police force to eliminate voter fraud. And I think Florida is actually very instructive because Ron DeSantis hasn't hid his admiration for Viktor Orban. You know, what Viktor Orban did is he used democracy to rig democracy in favor of himself. And Ron DeSantis and Republicans have learned from that, and they're openly copying and admiring that example and trying to bring it to the United States. You know, if you look at the movie Star Wars, I think episode 3, and, you know, where the Emperor doesn't need to have the Sith go in and overthrow the Senate simply vote him the power to make him the dictator. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing now. George Lucas drew on ancient Rome for that movie, but I think you can also draw upon what's going on with the GOP today.
Are you saying, is this how democracy dies, to thunderous applause?
Exactly. That's the scene where, you know, Emperor Palpatine was then Senator Palpatine basically convinces, or doesn't really have to convince, a rigged Senate to give him that power. That's basically the same play that the GOP would like. Have elected officials, have people inside the building who will do the heist for you, and rather than bringing people in from the outside. I also think one of the things that Wisconsin kind of highlights is the role of organized labor in all of this. You know, Wisconsin was a place where, you know, Ron Johnson, Paul Ryan, Scott Walker, Reince Priebus, they took a battering ram to organize labor in that state. And organized labor was essential for Democrats to organize these down ballot races, Secretary of State races, et cetera. We simply don't have that anymore. But also what has emerged from that rubble has been MAGA. MAGA has emerged from that rubble. It's not Mitt Romney voters and Paul Ryan people who've emerged. It's Donald Trump voters.
Yeah, you make a great point, including about the organizational dynamics. You've worked for several Democratic campaigns. Right. There's a policy discussion about labor, and the labor issues are somewhat more popular than they've been in a long time. When you look at a generation looking at pandemic, work from home, labor rights, billionaires run amok, that's at the policy level. But the long-term level of union members and whether they're actually empowered to calcify what some might call the sclerotic backbone of the Democratic Party is a deeper organizational question that takes years to build. Che, from the Devil's Advocate to Star Wars to the history of Wisconsin's labor movement, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.